So, hi, Mari. How are you?
Hi, Monica. I'm doing well, thank you. Good to see you.
Yes, so great to have you here. And finally, we're going to have a conversation that is recorded so other people can listen to the kind of conversations we've been having for, I don't know, a year and a half, probably. I don't even know when we started those. Do you remember?
Yeah, a couple of years, fall
Yeah.
2021.
Yes, around there. I think it was
Mhm.
2021. And it would be interesting to just like touch base on like how we met, or who are you, or what you do, or how would you like to define yourself? Although that's a very difficult question for me when I have to answer it. But yeah, let's introduce each other. So I know for sure that I met you around, I don't even know how to count, 3 years probably in a community called Rebel Wisdom. And I used to see you a lot in the background, but I never interacted with you until I think at one point there was a post. I can't remember what the post said. Can you remember where it was? And that's how I contact you.
Yeah, it was in the marketplace, and I was asking if anybody had any transcription that they would like done because I wanted to be able to build a sort of portfolio or a track record of experience. I had done some transcribing, but I didn't have any proof of it. Um, I had done some for my uncle. He was a fiction writer, and I had done some in the army as an analyst, but I didn't have any body of work that I could show. And so I was thinking, well, this would be fun because I get to support people in the community and I get to build a portfolio and I get to see if it's something that I'm actually interested in continuing doing on for more hours a day on a longer term basis. And so, but you did not take me up on my offer to do it for free. You said, you are valuable and you will be paid. And please transcribe these things for me.
Yeah, I thought that was really great because I had been recording and writing for a long time, but it was more like a relationship I created with myself and my thoughts. Because if I don't put them out, they're just gonna drive me nuts. I think it was one of the first things that I loved so much about my iPhone was that I could record myself daily. So I would just write memos, then I would record myself before having any session with therapists. Even if I had like a very important conversation with somebody or a client, I will record myself just to make sure that I'm like understanding what my process is. Because sometimes when I listen to my thoughts or I listen to what I'm trying to say, I listen to myself from a third perspective because I'm listening to myself. And I thought that that was very valuable. So when you said that, I was like, yep. And I knew it was not going to be like one time. So I thought like, no, 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 no. I have to pay you. Also because I like to think one of the most important features that I have about myself is the idea of allowing people to understand that the most valuable thing we have is our time. Let's talk a little bit about what was the experience because we didn't really meet. It was something like I was dumping you a lot of recordings. So I want you to tell me a little bit how it
Yeah,
felt.
we had been in some community calls just on different topics or, for different sorts of themes or discussions. Yeah, we hadn't really had a one-to-one. And actually, one thing I appreciate about you is your sense of value and the way that you contribute to that which you are valuing. So it's, an investment in yourself, but also a value in the other. And so like your willingness to pay for courses and for material, and then also, but your attributions. I love the way that you attribute quotes and ideas or concepts to the other, and yet you're synthesizing. So you're also creating something new or weaving in a way that hasn't been done before, but that's actually really, really special to me. Yeah, you just started, you said, hey, let's set up this Notion page and dumped a whole bunch of files in there. And then I just started, I just give you transcriptions and you would give me files. It was probably a couple of months before we started meeting regularly, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
yeah. And so I came to know you through your voice, through these very personal, intimate, basically, I guess, conversations you were having with yourself. I was transcribing them chronologically. And so I could see this evolution over time, really, in the way that you were speaking, how that was changing, and what I've come to learn terminology wise as your individuation process. Yeah, I just thought it was so beautiful and so meaningful and so impactful. And you would ask these questions, these open-ended questions that I thought, wow, these are incredible, regardless of the specific details of your journey. These questions that you're asking are really universal. They're so beautiful for any person to touch into. And when you speak about your chart, I'm not that familiar with astrology, but the way that you're talking about the dynamics between, let's say, Saturn and Jupiter, or the way that you're talking about the dynamics of your your moon and Saturn, or, how, whatever the interplay is, the way that you're speaking about it or bringing it forward, there is something of a universal element there, something worth inquiring for anybody, regardless of what their astrological chart might be. And so, yeah, so then I was like, oh, hey, have you ever thought about writing a book?
Then I was like, gooped. It was like, I got goosebumps because it's like one idea that I wanted to have since I was little was like, one day I'm going to write a book. And when I was around 16, I used to write my diary, right? And it was not different what I'm writing right now. And I had blogs before, but they were more intimate. And I remember like, I had an uncle. He used to live in Venezuela. And he was a poet. My God, he was so much about himself, big narcissist. And so he came down to Bogota to talk to his publisher, and he stayed at home. He was my mother, so he was my second cousin. And I was like so excited. I was, hi, uncle, like I'm writing. And he was like, so? I mean, he was so pedantic. He was like, so? And I was like, oh, I heard you coming here to talk to your publisher. I want, of course, me, being 16 years, I was like, I wonder if you can take me with him because I have all these books. I mean, the guy gave me a look like I was crazy. And then he looked at me and he said, probably he did a favor to me. He said, we writers, we like to sit down in little cafes and we smoke like with no filter. And I see how the way you like to dress up, you like pretty things. So you're not really suitable for those little places. And then your teeth are going to become yellow because you're going to be smoking so much, and you're going to have to like be dressed like a boho. And I remember like imagining, I was like, oh yeah, you're right. I don't want to be a writer. So that was my like dream of becoming. It was like he made it very visually, but in a way, it's not that I didn't think that I was not capable of writing. It's just like my attention drifted in a different way, and only until you said it, like I've never really thought, oh, I'm going to write a book. I would always say when people came about my artwork, when are you going to get a monogram? And I was like, well, if I ever get one, it's not going to be the typical book where you're going to have an essay, images. And I've done books before. I've designed books for people. I've designed a lot of my catalogs for my artwork, but I always thought, oh, it has to be special. It has to be something different. So when it was an invitation from you, from your side, and not a publisher, it was like a very intimate, that caught my eye. And I think that I said, hey, we should have a Zoom or something like that. That's when I was like, oh, maybe we should meet.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, so I thought that was great. I know that you also write, or you have a relationship with the written word or storytelling thing. So tell me a little bit about like how's that relationship with you, or has it grown, or where are you at this moment with that relationship?
Yeah, I enjoy sharing that which people want to hear. And so I've noticed that a lot of my writing is inspired by people saying, oh, that's an amazing story. You should write that. You should write that down. You should write that down. You should write that down. And I'm like, okay, noted. And I have received compliments on my writing. I don't get a sense that I'm, some great writer, but I do feel like I have, I guess, a unique perspective to share in a way that anybody has a unique perspective to share. The prompting, or I guess people finding value in it, has really been a significant aspect of me actually publishing onto my blog. A lot of my writing, I would say, is actually more communication oriented, just with friends and, in intimate relationships. And I find a lot of meaning in really being specific about my choice of words, what I'm really trying to convey, the responsibility that I'm trying to take for my piece of what's going on in the relationship, or, trying to figure out like, am I projecting? And if I am, can I bring that in to the conversation, or is it not appropriate? Or am I trying to make the other person feel some way, and why? And like really trying to be aware of these subtle dynamics, and then also considering things like, limiting beliefs. What kind of language am I using? Am I saying I can't do this, or I never, or always, or, and so I really enjoy wordplay, and I enjoy really like being precise and accurate with words, and then also coming up with, I guess, scenarios transferability, you could call it, like where I have something, I'm doing something in one place, and then I find out that it is useful or it has impact somewhere else in my life, or maybe some abstract concept that I've been able to make practical. And I enjoy writing about that and bringing that in, because to me, if it's not practical, then, it's not so great. I say I put the fun in functional.
Yes, I think, yeah, the fun and functional, I like that because I have very similar idea about what every experience in life should be, whether it's a discipline that you get, and I really like the word discipline. I'm also very big on like trying to define words etymologically or try to find a connection between what a word means and also how we feel towards it. I found that connection being very important for me throughout my years because I learned many languages. So I knew that I was a very different person when I speak Spanish or when I speak in English or French or Italian or Greek. It's not that I sound different, I just act differently because every word that I utter has a different emotional kind of color and tone. And so I started paying attention to the origin of words because a lot of them, unbeknownst to many people, they come from either Latin or they come from Greek. So if you go to the root of the word, then you understand in principle when the words were created, that they really were attached to a meaning. That's like going to the very pure essence of it. So I like going to the essence of things and then sort of, because for me, the essence is something, and that's going to be very much related to the book. It has a lot to do with the structure. And then you have a deep connection to the structure, to the essence, then you can actually fly away and go and be curious and investigate and, just have lose yourself in the, I don't know, in the environment, and then come back and say, well, I'm building this new thing because I'm being curious. I feel like one of the things that happened that it was so incredible about our relationship, and we're going to talk about relationships in a little bit, was that the way that you connect things, I will call it like that's a very synthesizing kind of mind. They're different kind of minds, I have a creative mind, I have a synthesizing mind. My scientific mind is not very scientifically in the way of how the world thinks of science, but I do feel that it's very empirical, and I like to feel that my life is filled with function. That that I make things, I made a practice, a discipline, and then I don't know, test it, I experience it, and then I can come back and go like, yeah, I tested. This works for me. I thought that was amazing that you could understand the way I was writing. Because I remember at the very beginning, I would be a little bit apologetic. I don't know if I make any sense. And I say that a lot to people. I don't know if I'm making sense, because making sense, and this is a parenthesis, this is a place where we met. We were trying to make sense of the world, of what was happening to us during 2020. And I met incredible people who were all trying to make sense. So I don't know if you want to expand a little bit on that, of what does it mean to have a synthesizing mind. I feel you have that kind of connectivity or cognition in your brain. That's why we kind of work so well together.
Yeah, I highly, highly value that synthesizing feature of yours, that weaving, the interplay. It's so dynamic, and it's the weaving of it makes it so strong, the associations that are drawn. And I want to say real quick, one thing that drew me so much to finding meaning in your work was that the dive into the etymology. And so that to me actually provides, let's say, perhaps the strength of the yarn with which you're weaving. There's something so fundamental and so foundational, like you said, essence. So the essence of the yarn with which we're weaving to create something that is beautiful, that's so, so valuable. And then, yeah, with synthesizing, I have joked before, I've been in like book club meetings, let's say, where we're having a conversation and all the, people are talking and people are saying different things, and I'm kind of quiet and I'm listening, and I'm just like, wow, I love it so much. And I'm taking notes. And then I think, oh, well, at this time, this person said this thing. And I remember this podcast where so-and-so said this, and I read this part in this book, and I just bringing it together. Sometimes I'm invited to speak, well, we haven't heard from Mari. Let's see what she has to say. And I'll kind of like, I don't know. I love offering. It feels like something like a gift, or like I have received all these gifts, and I have this gift of bringing this together. And sometimes I actually write it up, and I'll put it in a post within the community space for the book club, just as a synthesis. I very, very much enjoy it and find, deep value and meaning in it. Yeah, it's something that I definitely have appreciated about your your work. And I would say too, when you said you have an artist's mind, I don't. And that's one thing that I love too, is getting this different perspective and these just the, let's say the wild, like the reaching out further, the knowing that there's more out there. There's more to it's more not in the novel sense, but there's more in depth, in time. The further you reach back in time, the more you find more overlap, more associations, more. And so while there is a novel aspect, especially with your bringing words together in your art, there's also like it's coming from a rich, deep exploration into just so many different aspects. What's the quadrivium, right?
Yes.
Is yes.
Yeah, that's like, thank you for that. Yeah, the quadrivium is something that I've been implementing in the last few years because I didn't even know how related to that part I was, because what's happening is I'm rediscovering that a lot of my practices, especially my mental processes, have already been assigned like a, way of thinking, because I didn't have any formal education. I barely made it out of high school. They kicked me out, and then I kind of pretended that I finished, and then I moved to Europe, and they're asking me for my whatever diploma. I was like, oh, didn't you get it? It should be in the mail. This is like way before internet. I was lucky, and they were like, we never received it. I was like, oh damn, it's only already 2 years. But anyway, and I keep on going. So, and I never really believed in certifications per se myself, and I'm not against them, but I'm not for them in my experience, because what has given me sort of like the expertise is the fact that I'm willing to experience and create an experience with the knowledge, and make sure that I can become curious and absorb a lot of information, and then synthesize it, or weave it in a way that it becomes meaningful to me, because what I'm bringing back is the experience. It's almost like going out on a field, and I said, I'm going to go and pick up flowers. And then I go, to the right, and then I found a little bee, and then I start running around the little bee. And then I forget about the flowers. And then I don't know, I bump into something like a little deer. And then I'm like sitting down and try to communicate with the deer. And then it's all of a sudden like midday, and it's hot, and I'm thirsty, and I'm hungry. So I'm like going to go and pick up some whatever berries that I find. And then I lose myself in time, and I don't care about like really what's going on, because I'm more curious about the experience of the exploration. Because at the end of the day, when I come back, if I come back, I will
Mhm.
be able to tell the story to somebody about how incredible this day and this journey, or the path to discovery, has been. And I do remember my friends and my family, like I used to be funny. I mean, there's this element of being witty, or being like, like little funny. I'm not a big joker, but I like to sometimes say certain things that I find funny, and I say them. So that got me in a lot of trouble in school, because I would be like trying to get out of a situation by being funny. But at times I would color my stories with that kind of wit, but very, very subtle. And then I noticed that people were laughing. I was like, oh, okay. So I'm making them connect to something else. So I was aware of like the capacity I had to tell a story, but not necessarily like those kind of stories with beginning or end, because my stories are like that description I just had. Like we go here with no aim, and then we come back, and when we come back, we can synthesize all this experience into what is meaningful in the moment. So my question was also, because I was thinking, is it, and it's a question that is very open, is like, isn't synthesizing something that is needed to happen in the moment? It cannot happen as a closed space. For me, synthesis is like, I am here now, and the relationship I have with information, or with a person, or with a thing, is allowing me for new things to emerge, like in a dialogue. That for me is the synthesis.
Mhm.
Do you agree? Or
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's the bringing together of things with something novel, or some piece that is, let's call it, like it could be a little epiphany, right? Or like an aha, or oh my goodness, or oh wow, or two things that didn't seem like they overlapped so much, and finding where they overlap, and then bringing that to light in a way that is relatable and fresh. I wanted to speak real quick to when you talk about empiricism, or like empirical practices. And so in this way, like if you say, well, I like the way you do science is a little different, I find that and please correct me if I'm wrong, but you'll learn something, and experiment and actually put it into practice for a while and see how it affects you. And then from there, decide what works and decide what doesn't, keep what works, and then, perhaps discard, but perhaps keep it in the back of your mind because it could be useful for something else in a different way. And so you have this relationship with, let's say, the experience. And analyze is kind of a cold word, but analyzing it or really being with it, or thinking about it, considering it, feeling it, like really bringing it in through all of the senses, the subtle senses, your intuition, like what is this, what's really happening here. And in that way, I think it's a crying shame these days that science is considered to be, or desired to be, so objective. To me, science is precisely beautiful because of the subjective quality. And a scientist requires some amount of inspiration or art, or like, oh, what if? And that what if, or, oh, I think this could happen. What could be a way that I could experiment? I mean, designing an experiment is creating something that hasn't happened before. And so precisely this particular subjective, and to me, there's almost like a spark, or maybe even like a spiritual dimension to it, this touching into the unknown, touching into the mystery, curiosity about the mystery, and willing to engage with it is so vital. And it feels so lost in this kind of like cold scientism sort of paradigm that is pervasive throughout our culture right now. And so I find your practices and the way that you're engaging with practices and discovering what works and what doesn't, and bringing in all these different aspects, I find that to be a very, like, an embodied synthesis, right? There's a way of living as a synthesis, like an ongoing synthesis that, yeah, it's incredible. And seeing that in you has been impactful and inspirational for me to do my own thing, not to take on your practices, and actually part of it in this last, one of my practices is following the moon cycle and setting intentions with the moon cycle, both on an annual cycle and then also for each individual lunar cycle. And my annual cycle intention is bind. I choose one word just to keep it very simple and see what will arise from it. And I realized I want to bind further to those practices with which I already have a deep and meaningful relationship. I don't feel a need to go out looking for more practices. I want to go deeper with the practices that I have. And that was, I would say, partially influenced by working with you and being in the process with you of seeing your own results and your curiosity and experimentation and like how you land and then how that flows. There's so much flowing. It's not like, oh, I do this practice and I'm going to do it exactly this way for the rest of my life. It's very open and dynamic. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Talk about time, which is a very important factor. I feel like my artwork it's always been about finding out like what's time, what space, and what memory, which is the emotional part of understanding these two coordinates that we live here in the third dimension. So it took me 30 years probably to figure out what I was doing with my artwork, because I came into the artwork like without knowing what I was doing, which I think it was a very big asset. And I felt it and I behaved it as an asset instead of feeling a liability. Although New York was very hard, I had to go against my own sense of limitations because I didn't have a degree and I didn't want to be indoctrinated. So there's this feistiness in myself that I don't want to be abiding by anybody's rule. And that's probably what has saved me so far. And still it's saving me because I'm not going to do it and for all the money in the world. So the interesting thing was like, it took 30 years to kind of like note, observe, try, do a lot of trial and error, and get so much inside of myself to understand that whatever I was producing creatively will have a manifestation in a material way. It will be either a projection, or it will be an installation, it will be a community workshop, whatever shape that will be. Only when after several months, sometimes years, when I will see the result and I will see how that was impacting the people. Then I could see throughout time what I was doing, but I needed time. So I think time is very important in terms of like understanding how we can mature. And Saturn is really the personification of that. And like we embody time. Kronos, is the Lord of time. And we are bounded by this definition of, you're born and you're dead. I always say that we're living between these two breaths, is the beginning and the end. And as much as we would like to understand, this is the most valuable of all things that we have, is the scarcity of that time. We don't have a timeline. And I probably learned that very early on when my father like had an accident and he died very young. He would die, he was 37 years old. And that really changed my life because it made me understand. And I remember my mom still saying, like, we should enjoy life. Your dad went for a pack of cigarettes and then he died. But she was saying it in a beautiful way, not like making fun of, but just saying like we should really dive into this channel of offering our lives to the moment and to living like that. So because it took me 30 years to figure it out. By the time I moved to Miami, where I called this, I escaped from the matrix. And that's the time around when I meet you, and I meet a lot of people in this community, which is like, now that I think about it, has been probably the most important decision I made, was enrolling in this community out of curiosity, because that was like what I did, because I sometimes allow that curiosity to lead me, because that's what's going to make me have empirical practices. I just went there with no expectation whatsoever. And what I found was, and I don't know if you remember, but 2020, we used to meet pretty much every afternoon one way or another. And we used to have like, I've never heard of, how do you call those rooms, the breakout rooms in Zoom. And then several practices that I was like, are these people crazy? What are we practicing here? Circling, and I don't know, like dialogos, and I don't know, somatic. What was that? Like, I don't know any of that. Like, I have never heard of those things, but they were so impactful to me because they led me, or they helped me, or they supported me in this journey of authenticity and individuation that I had put myself into after my divorce. But I needed a support system, and I needed practices to understand how to get out of that. And so by the time now that I look back, this 4 years, go, wow, isn't this amazing that we have this relationship, that there's something that is going to be coming out like a baby that is a book. So like 3 babies are coming out. And then and then I'm not doing any of this for the result, but for the experience. So the book in itself is just like a memento of all this time put together. So it's quite marvelous.
Yeah, it really is. And yeah, I think we've had probably pretty different experiences in the group or in the community. And it started as Rebel Wisdom, and then eventually Emergent Commons was born out of that. And we were in that community together for a while as well. That, being in relationships, being in that, being part of the volunteer structure, I'm a bit of a volunteer junkie. And so I generally find, let's say, well, you might say validation, but I also find, my usefulness or like it justifies my being in the community. Being in Emergent Commons has actually transformed that quite a bit, in that I really, really deeply care about, and I believe in the possibility of, like you're saying, like all these practices that were put into, that we were invited to do through Rebel Wisdom, being in relationships, being in meetings, being in events and activities, and participating in relationships, all of this so meaningful to me. Like, I actually thought at the beginning of Emergent Commons, I was like, oh, I want to be a part of this because there's a bit of legacy for me. Like, I want there to be a community that my kids can join if they want to be able to get into, really like get into the nitty gritty of a conversation, get into the difficult part, get into it because there's beauty on the other side of the struggle. Yeah, putting the time and effort into that. We had those different experiences where I was heavy on the volunteering side, and you were more on the, I would say, sharing content and being part of groups side. But I do think that being in those relationships and the ways that we have grown, it's truly like you said, it's maybe the biggest decision you've made. I would put it in that category too. Being in that community has been a life changer for me. There is so much flourishing. I am flourishing. I am being challenged to be greater than I am, to be part of something greater than I am, that really resonates with me, that I say, oh yes, I want this to continue into the future, and I want to try to make it as good as possible, the most true and good and beautiful thing. And it's going to evolve, and it's going to change, and it's going to be something that I might not even recognize in 20 years. Relationships and groups, it's been really difficult in that previous communities, I didn't actually feel like I belonged. I chose, with actually being in Rebel Wisdom and in Emergent Commons both, I kind of chose to feel like I belonged before I had a feeling of belonging. I kind of claimed or owned some kind of space and said, no, this is my space. This is my community. I get to shape it. I get to impact it. And a lot of that came from these practices that we're talking about, of actually getting into difficult conversations or getting into somatic practices and really having a much deeper understanding of, what my responses are, what my reactions are, what my activations are, what does it mean to really be triggered, and how does it feel to really be triggered, and how can I work with that? And yeah, it's been so instrumental, really. Yeah, definitely life-changing.
Yeah, and I want to say something because I asked Kai the other day if he wants to do one of this episodes, and he said yes. So I will talk more about my experience, particularly with him. But I want to note and touch something about it, that it was very beautiful. Like, because everybody will have a different relationship to why they joined the community. We were all like from all over the world: New Zealand, Australia. I mean, you're in the West Coast, I'm in the East Coast, Europe. And it was interesting because we were always finding like the right time, whether it was like at 3 p.m., what, like different crazy times, but we were like just connect to Zoom and be there. Some people were facilitating. That was the first time I ever heard that word. And I love the word facilitating because it's different, like the imparting, it's like directing, or I don't even know. So facilitating was like so beautiful. It's just, again, etymologically, it's like you are just making things happen, or you're helping the outcome of things in a way that is, for me, it's almost like unfolding. Facilitating, like opening up, is a very open, beautiful, like I'm moving my hands right now, it's like very open like that. So I thought that was something. I think the first time I heard it, I was like, what are they talking about? For me, the first probably 3 weeks of Rebel Wisdom, I was like scratching my head. I was like, okay, these people are as weird as I am, which is good. Like I felt safe. But then it was like, man, they're too weird. I have to like figure them out. But yes, we're in the pandemic, so I have time, and I'm willing to invest my time, because that's something that is very important about value, is like how much time I'm going to invest in myself, to be curious, and not just to, I don't know, like poke things, but actually be willing to go deeper. And that's where I think the whole value really happens, is when you just like take something that is curiosity, and then you bring it forward, and then you decide to dive into the rabbit hole, and then, get dirty. And then, I don't know, find another way out or something like that. So for me, when I was there, I was very triggered, because in communities before, I was always trying to be part of it, but not really. I will get close to a community, and if I could not feel safe, which it was never, I will basically leave. So there was always this me not even giving up, but like protecting myself. And I didn't know anything about trauma. So I remember the first time Gabor Mate came, and then Thomas Hubel, and I had like a little bit of a thing happening to me, and I volunteered on that Thomas Hubel thing, and I was crying. I don't even know what a recording is. I was like, I felt like I was 5 years old. But now I honor myself for like having been so open to my wound, because the wound that I had and I carried all the time is like, I did not feel that I could belong in a community unless I was a tyrant. Like, it is my way or the highway, that's what I used to do. So I prefer not to be hated because I was doing that. So I basically decided always to withdraw. It is through that triggers that I recognize them as like I was being triggered. I recognize that I could actually practice the whole shadow work that I do in community, because it was through these very difficult relationships where I could actually go back and look at what I was feeling, the somatic practice of how is this feeling in the body. But there was one thing that made it really valuable. It was that I always felt that I was in a safe place because people were very invested in themselves in a similar way, and people were invested in like collaborating and creating a safe space. And that, I have to say, it was not perfect because nothing is perfect, but within the imperfection of it, it was the safest place where I could actually walk like slowly towards a place that normally I would have not there, because I would have gone like, forget it. They're going to eat me alive, or I'm going to eat them alive in the process.
That I started leading meetings. Like I would say, oh, let's have an event. And I would host the event. And I remember I used to work at this church, and I was asked to give a testimonial about something. I don't even remember what, but it's a non-theistic church, so it was probably about a reading or something like that. And I was like, no, that's all right. I'd rather clean toilets. And I was so serious. I would have rather cleaned toilets than spoken in front of anybody. And there is something about Zoom that's equalizing. We all have the same size rectangle. We're all, usually from the shoulders up. None of us have legs. So that's a cool thing about Zoom. But even aside from that equalizing element, I found so much joy in hosting, but in facilitating, like you're talking about. And there's like passive, right? Easing. So it's easing the unfoldment. And what could I do best to aid in that discovery of whatever was going to happen? What could I do to create, like you say, a structure that's flexible enough to allow for emergence, but strong enough for people to feel welcome and safe and like sharing, like really participating. So I found that incredibly valuable, and I continue to. And in fact, last year I had this interesting kind of ecstatic experience where I was listening to some relatively boring podcasts on facilitating, and I just kind of got really lit up, and I was like, oh my God, I want to be a facilitator, or I at least want facilitating to be in my future in some meaningful way, because it is precious being with people and having those transformational moments together. Being part of that for me it's meaningful for me. I can see that it's meaningful for the other, and being in that relationship and knowing that I was a part of it really gives me great satisfaction in my life. And I deeply appreciate it. And all of that has contributed to me being a better mother, actually, too. And the way that I facilitate our conversations, and the way that I am not a snowplow parent. I do not try to pave the path for my children and make it just super easy, but there's an easing of their unfoldment. What is their true nature? What is their individual flower that's, slowly blossoming? And what can I do to contribute to that in a way that they have appropriate challenges? A flower without wind will have a weak stem. Or let's say maybe a tree, maybe not a flower, because there are a lot of flowers that grow inside houses and have no wind and they're pretty strong. But let's say a tree. So if each is a tree, like they need wind, right? They need cold. They need all sorts of metaphorical challenges and hermetic stressors and opportunities to discover what they actually enjoy. So that could be, let's go do this activity. I don't want to. Well, you're going to try it anyway, and let's just see, it's an experiment. Let's just see what happens. And so it has definitely influenced many aspects of my life, having been in that, like you say, in that space where it's welcome.
I love that you're started to talk a little bit about your children, and therefore we want to lead towards education. And because that's a very big subject for both of us in a very different way. I was born in a household where pedagogy and education was like the main theme. Like I grew up like knowing that you teach what you love. My grandmother opened like the first kindergarten in Colombia or in South America in 1939. She did it out of like pure love towards education. My grandfather he was a merchant, so he would take these boats from Bogota. I mean, he had to go to Cartagena or Santa Marta, whatever. No, I think it was Barranquilla, take a boat, come to New York, buy whatever, and then come back. And for some unknown reason, every time he was coming back, my grandmother ended up being pregnant again. It's the 30s, right? Whatever. So 9 children later, my grandmother she was a force of nature. Her name was Maria. And she was so curious woman, such a like progressive person. She had a lot of Aquarius in her chart. And the interesting thing is like she was basically, I don't know how she was handling it. So she decided to open a kindergarten, but she wanted to teach. But the whole idea is like she could have ended up teaching in a university or something like that. But that, no, she just like, I'm going to open a school. So she opened a school, and my grandfather kept on coming, but he died quite young. So this is something interesting because the male figure in my family has always been kind of missing. So he died, I think he had an epileptic seizure and he died young. So my mother was the third child out of 9, right? And she had always been very devoted child. Like my mom had this kind of like devotion in her, but also very, very independent, very funny woman, very capable, very tiny, but very like a force of
Mhm.
nature as well. So she was like my grandmother's like right hand. But she said she used to tell the stories that she used to pick up her siblings like this and teach them. So my mom had like also education in her blood. And when I grew up, like even before my father died, my mom said, I'm gonna open a school, but she didn't tell my dad. So she kind of like in the way that she created the little kindergarten in our house, and my father would leave. I remember with the suitcase, like he was a lawyer and he was studying economy or whatever. He would leave and we're like, bye, dad. And then as soon as the door closed, my mom's like, all right. And then boom, 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 we changed the house and take out this like little folding tables and everything. And some people from the neighborhood would come in and she would be, okay, class. And then a few minutes before my father will arrive, boom, everything disappeared. And one day he decided to come home early. And my mom was like, holy smokes, what am I gonna do? And my father says, like, you wanna have a school? Well, do it. And she was like, yeah. So she opened school. We moved everything upstairs. She had the school downstairs. She hired everybody in the neighborhood, hire other women. Can I have your house? And then hire people who had cars to go and pick up children because more children come. So she opened the school and she was very progressive. And so I grew up in this, I don't know, environment where my mom is like, would you like to help? And I said, yeah, but I want to do something that I love. So I was teaching people, kids 2 years younger than me how to read and write. Then at one point, she bought this machine. I don't know if you remember this machine in the 70s that it was to reproduce things that it had alcohol. I have to remember the name of that. I was high on alcohol when I was like 5 years old. I remember being on the stool, go like, I'll do it. And then mom, here they are. And she was like, you look a little bit dizzy. I was like, oh, I love doing this. So I was like the chief of like reproductions, and she bought like a photocopy machine. I was like, I'll deal with it. Then she went and she bought, my mom was crazy. She went and she bought like offset printing. And she sent my brother and me when we were like 9 and 10 to another city. So we learned how to like print. I know how to print books because of my mother. She was like always going 3 steps ahead. So
Wow.
yeah. So the interesting thing is like that thing about education was a seed that it was there, but I never really wanted to educate unless I have passion. So only after all this process with the rebel wisdom and knowing the whole idea of facilitation, I have like study groups. I don't call
Mhm.
them workshops. I want ongoing relationship with few people, small group, where I actually invest my time to, we have a program because we're like studying others, Bitcoin or human design or astrology. And I invest my time by being with them, engaging in the process for them learning. And I'm also learning because the beautiful thing about facilitation, which I think is not that I'm here above everybody telling you what the truth is. I'm saying, hey, I got these things. Somehow they're like that, but why don't we just put them on the floor and play with them and see what happens? And that's what I feel that is a difference. And it's not so hierarchical. It's more like
Mhm.
open. I'm learning a lot. So I don't know if you consider like that experience of facilitating something.
Yeah. Well, and it's also, so it's not structured specifically like this belongs in this category, and then we're going to shift completely, and this belongs in this category. And this was actually a really big part. So I homeschooled my kids for some years, and I never intended to homeschool high school. And actually, all 4 of my kids are in public school currently. But one of the joys that I had was considering, well, anything in a holistic sense. I just did away basically with subjects. And people would say, well, how do you teach subjects? And I'm like, well, I don't teach subjects. I teach, or I'm inviting us to learn about as much as we can about anything. So if I have a child who's interested in slugs, and then we learn about slugs, but then we learn about a scientist who is interested in slugs, and we learn about that scientist's life, his biographical information, and then we learn about, well, what was the historical context that he was living in? Like, what were the kinds of tools that he had available? Or, what was, I mean, sometimes there's with science, not so much with slugs, I think, but sometimes with scientific discoveries, there's some kind of political pressure or some kind of politics involved in it. And then there's often math. And what kinds of studies were these scientists doing when they're learning about slugs? And what are the things that are current? What are people currently studying about slugs? What does that mean? And what are fictional stories about slugs? And how are these authors interested in slugs? Why is that interesting to a fictional author? And just bringing in all these different elements and then writing a little story about it and drawing slugs and watching little videos about slugs. And so really exploring almost to exhaustion these different aspects. It wasn't just a value, it was so much fun. It was such a fun part of the exploration with them to be able to, I mean, my kids at some point started saying, oh, well, that scientist did the same thing as that scientist. They're drawing their own associations. Oh, well, look, this scientist was alive during the time when this scientist was alive. And they probably, I wonder if they talked to each other because these similar kinds of things were going on, just kind of sparking their own curiosity, but also recognizing they're people. Like all these people are real people everywhere. They're people, and humanizing the other and also bringing to life without just saying, there's just such a common like, oh, slugs are bad, well, like it's such a narrow and useless thing to say, oh, slugs are bad. Perhaps they're not vital element of a garden, but perhaps they are in some way. I don't know, but I can see that gardeners could have a particular problem with slugs, but that doesn't preclude slugs from having their own intrinsic value and also to be a valuable part of an ecosystem. And maybe on some days I'm a slug, maybe.
Me too. Guilty.
Right. Yeah. And so, yeah, playing with that and not categorizing, but also just, I think it would have been fun to be able to do this with other families. I didn't find that other families were interested in teaching like this. It's much easier in a way to teach subjects, to just sit a child down with a book or with, a video, or to just do a regimented workbook or a curriculum. There was some loneliness in it for sure. And my kids did not have I did not create or, invite the social opportunity that a lot of kids have with other kids. But then again, there are 4 of them, and they have really good relationships with each other, and they have a shared curiosity or a shared kind of orientation toward there being something more. There's something more, and what is it?
Yeah. I'm also like, we're 4 in my family when I think about it, even though my mom, like, she was always like experimenting with us. But also I have to be fair, like she was this amazing woman, but she also was a widow and she was a female in the 70s. She had to I don't even know how she did it. And she experiments so much. And so we were kind of left alone in the house a little bit until she would come back. And we will only call her when like, Mom, I'm about to kill him. And she was like, okay, you're going to hear from me. So at one point, she had this crazy idea. I mean, I think my mom is like officially like a really crazy one. She had an idea about bringing somebody to take care of us. I've never heard of this happening ever before, and I don't think it's ever going to happen. My mom decided to hire a nun. American nun. She went, I don't know where, and she said she has to speak English, she has to be Catholic, and she has to be the tutor of my children. I'm willing to pay whatever money. And they say yes. So then this nun came. We went to pick her up at the airport. She spoke no Spanish. It was like being in the military Catholic church. And I'm like, that woman is not going to rule me because we're unruling in my house. Like, I'm the softest one. Everybody's crazy in my house. And she came and we were like, I mean, we were young and we were giggling all the time. There's something that really bonds us together in my family, is a sense of humor. Maybe because of trauma, that was the only way that we actually made things lighter. Even when my mom passed a few months ago at the service, we were just telling jokes. that was a way of knowing that we're fine because we had to make fun. I mean, why not? She would have been literally making fun of everybody. So when the nun came and we realized our lives are going to be very different because she's very structured in a way that not even my mom was like this, because she was very open to things. We decided, we plotted. This is one thing we did when we were children. We plotted, although we're so different, to be against the evil nun. And I think within 3 or 4 weeks, she was out. She went and asked for asylum. Next door was another school. But we did, I mean, I'm going to go through all the horrible things we did to her, but we ruled. So there was moments when despite the fact we were so different, and my mom, I don't know how she managed with this and this is one thing that I want to talk about. Like, she understood that the most important thing in humanity is our differences. So she was always the captain of be yourself, be happy, be unique, be authentic. She never used the word authenticity, but she always said, like, if you follow your bliss, if you follow what you love, you will always be yourself and you will not owe anything to anybody. Like, you will be grateful for the journey, but you own it. It's like, be responsible for it. And she always said, I will never accept that you come back after a certain age and you said, Mom, you didn't do this, you didn't that, because I actually allow you to be yourself. So she had also a lot of Aquarius in her chart. She was like, because Aquarius is the archetype that symbolizes like uniqueness and authenticity and individuation. So that's where I'm going to go a little bit right now. I'm going a little bit back to the book. One of the things that I enjoyed the most when we started our relationship of, recording, and then I was writing, and then it kind of developed a little bit. And I want to hear from your perspective. How was that change? Because at one point I asked you, can you edit this? Like, I basically gave you the wheel to drive, which I've never done in my life. And that means that I really trusted you. I trusted myself, trusting you. So there was something really beautiful there, something that I needed to understand about knowing how to delegate. And by me trusting myself and trusting you, I was actually enriching the space, the ecology, to allow something to be created that is bigger than I could do by myself. And I actually think that it's very enriching that you kind of like took the wheel, and the book, the way it is composed, it has a lot to do with what you're putting together. So I want you to tell me a little bit how that experience has been for you. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so sometime, I don't know how long after I initially asked you about the book, you actually asked me, Mari, if you were going to put together a book of my work, what would it be? And I was like, well, I mean, that I felt very trusted in that moment. And I could see, like, wow, there's been like major growth here, because you had spoken about trust and relationships and collaborations even, and like some collaborations that had kind of gone sour, or, where they're like, let's say power dynamics or something like that. But basically, let's say a lack of trust. And I knew immediately, because I'd already been thinking about it. And I said, it's this individuation process, and you being your fullest self in order to be of best service, and not without sacrificing yourself, and not without losing yourself, and not, so taking care of yourself and then coming back and offering something that is uniquely you and highly valuable, and of the most, like you're saying, following your passion, and that best self for community, which then can in turn informs best self again, right? And then in turn allows for more into community. And that, I guess, reciprocity, or that back and forth potential with the relationship, I found to be incredibly valuable. And I thought, oh, this would be such a great, it's not individuation toward narcissism. It's not individuation toward hoarding or accumulation of wealth, or toward, showing off or fame. It's in order to best be part of the world, right? I mean, we can't even say our little geographical communities anymore, because we're just such a, we're global, like in a sense. And so really to be truly part of the world. I mean, you kind of said, you're probably more familiar with my body of work than I am. And like, and I was like, yeah, I know what I want to bring in. And so, yeah, it kind of brought in kind of like a skeleton framework with that. And then, we've been adding as you continue to write, we add where it seems relevant. And it has been dynamic. It's been really fun. I like these associations that you draw, and then drawing them like, drawing in myself. And I've actually been quite honored that you want to bring me in as like our relationship. It has unfolded. Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, I love
I'm
it.
excited about the book.
It is it's exciting. Yeah, I had terrible collaborations, especially with ex-husbands. We don't want to go there. So one of the things that I found like really interesting was that we came back and forth about you being the editor and you picking up like and guiding the direction of the book, which was very interesting for me because I'm always very sure about what I want or I don't want. So I was like, understanding that this is new for me and how does that feel. Obviously, again, it had a lot to do with the way that I'm trusting myself, trusting others, and that has a lot to do with me listening to my body and my instincts and my intuition to know like this is the right situation or the right person to be able to be trustworthy for what it needs to be done. So in that context, it was beautiful also to say, and we've been talking about it in the last few months about like, okay, so you're also like a co-producer of the book. You're helping me shape it. And I think writing a little bit about it is like you're not just editing, you are guiding the thing, but the way that the book has been shaped, defined, so it has a lot to do with your input and how you are actually directing. And it feels great to be directed that way. I also have to say that I bring some of that experience from like when I do a lot of commission work. That's when I really understood that my strength was to understand the needs of community. Although I'm a very individual person, it's all about me, myself, and I. There is a little bit of spark that is important for me that I kind of reconnect to community and retell the story. So that part of me that is actually sharing is a part of my collectiveness, the very few that I have, because I have a lot of me, myself, and I, and I know it. That's the way it is. I'm not gonna. I don't want to pretend that it's not like that because it will be like lying to myself about who I am. But I'm interested in like, okay, if I'm going to be interested in like sharing something in a community or in a collective, I want to make sure that I pair in a relationship that is meaningful. So whatever is going to be filtered out is going to have something that feels that is wholesome and is not it doesn't stay in this narcissistic. I don't consider myself a narcissist, but in this individual shape of being, which is my artwork somehow was for a while until I started doing commission work and I integrated the needs of community. So I had already seen that in the work and I thought, oh, that's my strength. That's my strength. And even I can tell like a few days ago, I was, I took on another thing. I became a panelist on a Bitcoin conference. And it was because of how I integrated with the public that I understood immediately. It's like, yes, never forget that you're speaking or being of service for the good of humankind. That's it. And I can shine like all the light can be on me. But if I'm kind of like initiator or inspired by the collectiveness, oh my God, I can go really, really big. And so there's no war. It's not me against, elbowing my way into the space. No, it's not that anymore because I already understood that it is always with that aim of speaking to others. So for the book, for instance, obviously, I'm still human. So it's like, even if one buys my book, obviously I'm not writing it for a public, I'm writing it for myself, but I know that it can benefit a public, whichever that is, 1, 10, 100. Doesn't matter because my intention is not to, as you say, like show off. And I usually say this, I'm not here to show off, but to show up. It's more like about accountability, about inspiring people to actually take their own courage to be themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that you're acknowledging some of the direction of the book that I have brought in. It's been meaningful for me. You have brought in aspects that have made it even more fun for me, which is I think you're touching into something that is, I don't know, like let's say a phenomenon that's kind of happening that single media is not maybe as interesting, or it doesn't have the potential to convey in the same way as multimedia. And while it's still a book, one of the books is going to have quite a bit of graphs and charts and illustrations to be able to like deepen the understanding, but also invite a personal exploration of some of the concepts and some of the terminology from the first book. So it's a 3-part, right? A 3-part book. And the first book will mostly be text. I'm sure you're an artist, so there's going to be art. I
Yeah.
guarantee,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
But the second book being that visual exploration invites a much different kind of relationship with the material, potentially a much more personal one, and allows to take it to a place that is not, let's say, defined by you, or it's not directed by either of us, right?
Mhm.
It's much more open exploration. And then for the third book to have the journal prompts, and that one's, I have a sweet spot for that one, since that was part of the impetus to even ask you if you had ever thought about writing a book to begin with, was these open-ended questions that you were asking. And I was like, oh, the universality of it. And so, yeah, that's been where the book has gone, is so much more exciting even than in the beginning,
Yeah.
when I was like, oh yes, this is so cool. I can't believe it.
Yeah,
The
I love that.
possibility.
And this, what you just say, I want to add something that is coming right now for me is that because it is all relational. So the first part of the book that I called Everything I Need Is in My Body, which is like a phrase it came down to me during the pandemic. It's about how I relate to myself and how brought so much space into those emotions with somatic practice and most of the stuff that we were speaking before. And how I allow myself to have that space and that echo of listening to my own thoughts or rereading what I was feeling. And so I created this path towards understanding my relationship with myself. The second part, it's more about how Monica relates to the world. So that's why I'm bringing so much like illustrations about time, because there's so many different ways of understanding the world. I like to see the world a lot with time cycles. And that's why I love astrology or human design. I also been learning how to read like financial charts. I love to look at history and understand like, oh, this is repeating. Oh my God, this is a pattern. Although my mind is very open and receptive, there's one part that is very logical and looking for patterns. And that's how it works. So it's a circuitry that is very logical within a context that is very abstract and very open. So the abstract mind, it's allowing everything to happen, all kinds of history, stories, narrations, colors, shapes that it's not defined. And then sometimes the logical one comes like, okay. We just have to put these things together and try to find a pattern. And within that pattern, make sense of how I'm experiencing my reality. And then the third part, which was really prompted by you telling me, hey, this is what I like the most, not the most, but like one of the parts that I think they're very strong and that you saw me doing during my Substack and everything and throughout the writing was when I asked the question to the other. And so I thought this would be very beautiful when I integrate the viewer, the reader, the other, because I'm also integrating you. This is where we're going to have a little bit of a dialogue there. I'm going to introduce you and you're going to have your own space. Like Mari, not just the editor, or like, because sometimes this kind of roles, they become more like ghosted, but I don't want that, because I want to actually bring forward and value everything that you've been putting to it, because it is of value to me, like enormously. Like I wouldn't be able to do this the same. It would be a completely different experience. So I think that the third part, the second book is called We Are the Architects of Time, because it's about how we're like perceiving this time. And the last one is called The Only Revolution is to Be Oneself, which is, again, these three prompts came to me during the pandemic. It was very confusing for me at the beginning what to do with that, because they were given to me as a command. Got to do something with this. I actually made a piece out of it, but it was too abstract, like a beautiful image. And then they kept on coming and coming, and I used them as hashtags everywhere. And then they start having this like incredible meaning, because I do feel that evolution and revolution are part of the same thing. We need to move and confront our fears. We need to confront whatever it's uncomfortable in ourselves in order to move out of stagnation or corruption or whatever, and then actually have the courage to move to a newer place, because that new place is going to give us the opportunity to grow in a completely different way, to have a different kind of relationship to the new. And that, for me, I think is the strength of everything that I'm doing, that I'm not afraid of being courageous. Today is a very important day. I have become very political lately, but in a way that is because I think that we have to assume a lot of responsibility. I put a little flag somewhere. I put the Lone Star flag of the great state of Texas. and saying that we have to be very courageous now, because a lot of our liberties and a lot of what we really are made of are going to be taken away if we sit down and do nothing. And I'm not saying to go out and kill your neighbor. No, what I'm saying is like, there's a little voice inside of ourselves is telling us like really for a long time to just break the chains and be curious, go and learn something new. Because in that process of going and smelling the flowers, oh my God, I know what I found. So that's for me is the most important part of like the message in my book. Whew.
Yes, listening to that inner voice or the body experience, really paying attention and, exploring it. Like, do I have fear? Where's the fear? What does that feel like? If I really sink into it, what am I afraid of? Or what am I angry about? Or, because anger can actually be quite an exciting emotion. There's a lot of energy with anger. And so it can actually feel much better than apathy. It can feel, righteous and like I'm doing something and I'm working for good. What's the underlying piece of it? What is it that I really want, or how can I really contribute to it? What's the piece that really I feel like I can learn more to understand more? Where can I impact? Or how can I be in conversation or relationship with it in a way that means I'm not just, contributing to a system that feels off, any kind of feeling off, whatever that off is, like really sitting with that and feeling it and leaning into it and exploring it. So valuable.
So beautiful. So going back to the synthesis, I think this is very important for me because it took me a while to realize that the ways I was thinking are very particular and they're not rare, but not everybody's used to that. I mean, I had a lot of trouble in school because I needed to be following like a curriculum and of behavior and also ways of thinking that I was like, I don't work like that. And so it used to be taken not seriously. Maybe some teachers thought that I was like trying to disrupt their flow, especially when I was very curious about a subject matter. I mean, I will be always the kid like, I have a question. And they were like, Monica, please. And I was like, one last one. And people just didn't really give me the time. Many teachers didn't. Some very incredible teachers understood that if they would cultivate my curiosity, they will make the best out of me in the classroom. So I really treasure a lot good educators, but they're very difficult to find. I can spot who is a good teacher and who's a bad one immediately. Like I'm not going to enroll in any class when the person is not invested. So that's why I don't really follow a lot of academia and stuff like that, because I know for a fact a lot of my friends or ex-friends, they're not going to be listening to this anyway, they were doing a lot of jobs in universities in New York, or they had tenures for many years because it was a sense of security, but they were not educators. And that is a very big problem because we've been teaching children, or we're allowing children or young adults or even older people to be in places where their structure is not open and they're not really instructed to be curious and to find something else. They're just like, part of a system where nobody cares. And that for me is a really big problem with education. And so one of the things that I find that is happening to me, and this is, it's it's the joke of life. Like I thought I was going to run away from being part of a family full of educators. And lo and behold, like one of the most important things that have become really important in my life is education. And as I just finished that panel the other day, I already came today, this morning, I sent an email to the person who says, you want to be part of another panel? And I said, can I give you a suggestion? And he said, yes. And I said, look, this is what I'm feeling because they're coming to Miami. So I kind of brainstormed with another friend, another Bitcoiner. Why don't we create a panel about South Americans? Because, we need to give this information to our people that live in countries where inflation is off the roofs. We need to get this information because we have the information. And they came back and they're like, yeah, would you like to talk? So I'm embodying right now a place of maturity / courage to just go out there and say something that is sparking inside of me is to be able to connect to other people and pass along transmission of information that sometimes could be knowledge. I mean, it is knowledge because I know it, because there's a difference between data, information, and knowledge. The difference is like sometimes you're reciting stuff, and sometimes with knowledge, you can actually tell a story about it. You can be asked a question like in different ways, and you can answer it differently because you know what you're talking about. And so I do value a lot good teachers. I have invested not only a lot of money but time and studying with incredible people. And I find myself so fortunate that I've been studying with the right people at this moment in time. My synthesis, and I want to ask you about what your synthesis has been in the last 4 years, but my synthesis per se, that it's going to be kind of clear in the book, or not necessarily, because I'm not going to have like an end to it, but it's going to be spoken kind of here and there, is the fact that I invested in my own value and my needs, and in many different ways, through education, through curiosity, through giving myself the time and the space to move from a place where it was no longer okay for me, even though it gave me some sort of security, New York, the art world. And I had the courage to just like drop everything and come over here, Miami, and, enroll in communities that I didn't know, do practices I had no idea what they were talking about. I also allowed myself to be confused for a while. That was amazing. Then I started slowly implementing those experiences in my artwork and seeing that there was a different direction. There was a different direction in my work. And I was like, "Whoa, this is really beautiful," because I was seeing it like happen like almost in real time. I also have to say that a lot of my relationships ended because there was no way for me to be resonating in the same kind of environment or ecology, because I was already kind of like in a different place, which is okay. I give thanks to that part of my life, but I'm not no longer clinging to it, and I'm not like suffering because I don't leave it. Actually, I'm more caring about what I'm building right now because it is ongoing. So the synthesis in a way came, and this was like a wish that I made. Like I really want to find out like what the whole value, what's my place in the world? Like how can I be of value, of service? And then it came like being curious about what money is. So I started studying money, and then that led me to Bitcoin, and then it led me, and Bitcoin has led me to understanding that everything that I had already put in my life, like in time, curiosity, and engagement, became a synthesis. So Bitcoin has become the synthesis of every single thing that I've been curious, from philosophy to psychology, economy. Like my father was an economist. He will be like laughing right now that I was like, but probably he was a Keynesian economist, not an Austrian school. So there's a little bit of a difference there. But anyway, where I am right now, which is I don't know. I say this, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm going. And I'm not staying on the boat of like, this is happening to me. I'm going on this boat, like, okay, we're steering the boat in a place of freedom. And that's the only thing that really, I'm synthesizing my freedom in many different ways. And it has a lot to do with education. So that's my question to you is like, what have you been synthesizing in the last 4 years or so?
Yeah, I had a deep knowing that it was possible for people on different sides of an argument or of a vision or of a political issue to be able to come together and have a conversation and find value in the other, not necessarily in the other argument, but there's just such a disconnect between the issue and the person. And so I found it so disheartening and demoralizing, deflating, just a bit touch of despair that I experienced so much of people on one side of an argument looking at the other side as though because they didn't share the same values that they didn't even have values. That was really, really hard for me, but I knew it was possible to bridge that. I believed it. Maybe not for every person in this lifetime, but just had, even I would say touch of despair because I had far more hope or belief in possibility. Joining this community, it's not everything for every person, but in general, any topic is on the table. And it's not how we land on the topic. And it's not even whether we land on the topic. It's how we approach it. It's all about how we engage, not just with the topic, but with each other. So can I see you as fully human, regardless of what you think or what you believe? And can I engage with you in a fully human way. And being with others in this way has really given me the embodied experience of doing it, has given me a completely different perspective than when I was in conversations and there are people who are saying open-minded, but then the condescension and contempt that would drip from their mouths and leak from their pores and emanate from their, from their spirits and discolor their auras. It was just so, and just that condescension and contempt. And I just felt so much sadness about it. And I'm like, why do we have to other in that way? Unothering, rehumanizing, re-enchanting, right? Enchanting with the other. And like you said that your mom said it was the differences, right?
Yeah.
That was specifically vital for my mom. Always the variety is the spice of life. Variety is the spice of life, so much. And that really, really shaped how I appreciated when I was young and have continued to appreciate and grow in appreciation and in that knowing that I don't have to be the same as somebody else. In fact, it is our differences. And the synthesis is, you say like thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis. When we're talking about humans, thesis and antithesis don't work as words for me necessarily. It's human one and human two, something like that, right? So I don't want to put anti with a human. We have these two humans but where is the overlap? How can we come together? What can we create that meets the underlying values? If I assume you have values, I want to know what they are, right? If I assume you're fully human, I assume that you have a range of human experience and that you got to the place where you are for a reason. All of that matters in what we can create together. And if you, for any reason, feel less than human, you will not want to create with me. You'll feel shut down. You'll feel cornered. You'll feel narrowed. And none of that allows for a truly creative space, for something new to be born, for a playfulness. Yeah. There's such a lack of humor. You said that humor was important to you. I am a big joker. I mean, I'm a slip the one-liners in and a nudge, maybe elbow a little too hard. Humor is very, very important to me. And just the humorlessness with which so many people are approaching these various issues, this lack of playfulness not just indicate, but is demonstrated in the lack of creativity and solutions. And there's also another big thing was that if I don't believe in your solution, then I don't believe that the problem actually even exists, right? And so somebody might say, well, if you don't think that the best way to fight climate change is by reducing carbon emissions, then you're a climate denier. And to me, that link, it's got to be broken. It's got to be broken. There's just so much more potential if we can say, okay, let's get back to first agreeing what the problem is. And by agreeing what the problem is, how are we human in that? How are we human in that? What's our relationship with it? And then what are the possibilities? There are so many possibilities. And so being in that possibility space, yeah, I would say I also don't know where I'm going. There's something about, like you were talking about releasing trauma. All of these things lend to feeling safer within the self, trusting the self, and being able to be in a playfulness, which allows for creativity and emergence and synthesis together and synergy, right? Being in relationship and coming up with something, because for me, 2 brains is better than 1 and 3 is better than 2, and like, I can't say like not the whole world should not be working on every single small problem. Like we have our strengths, but it really is so valuable to get other perspectives and like, I love that. Oh, I never thought of that. I love that feeling. Oh, I never thought of that. That being, you said in confusion, but just being in unknown. There's so much joy for me in being in the unknown. I don't know what's going to arise. Definitely feel hopeful and in the possibility, having had all of this really like embodied experience of what can be. And oh gosh, just treasuring it.
I love it because you say I feel hopeful, and I was going to ask you the last questions like, how do you feel? Because I also feel hopeful. I have that quality that I'm able to see beauty when there's a lot of darkness. And I will never give that up. That's part of me being optimist about life. And so I'm just gonna try one last day. Let's try to see the beauty in the world.
My son came home the other day and he said, Oh, I'm so frustrated with my biology teacher because she keeps giving us these packets and she'll say, okay, this is going to be really hard. You guys can do it. And he's like, why does she say it's going to be hard? First of all, it's not hard for everybody. It might be hard for some people, but nobody in the class actually even seems to be struggling. Why set it up like that? That was such a beautiful, to me, example of him having internalized something that I've
Mm.
been sharing with my kids for so long. But yeah, why? We don't have to set it up as hard. There could be challenges along the way. And in fact, challenges are going to help us. Challenges are going to inform us. Challenges are going to let us
Yeah.
know where are our growth points. But that doesn't mean, oh, it's going to be hard and dread it. It doesn't mean dread it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but that says so much about the way she was taught. I had learned to be more empathic and compassionate about like people, and this is all through the work with trauma and Gabor Matins, just not to be judgmental when I see pain in the world, I see behavior that is not supposed to be okay. Like I tend not to judge anymore and say, I wonder how their childhood was. I wonder if they had a parent that was like, hey, this is going to be hard. Why you try? Like it happened to me a week ago. I was introduced with somebody, at Snaple thing and said, oh, she's an artist. She's amazing. And so the person is like, oh, my daughter is an artist. And I'm like, wow, how old is she? No, she's 22. And I said, oh, fantastic. Oh, did she study art? Well, she paints very well, but I told her that she should get a plan B. And I looked at this person and I'm like, a plan B? This is what you told your daughter that she's 22, that she has to think about failure? He was like, looking at me, I'm like, I want to talk to her. He goes, what for? I said, I want to tell her that what you're saying, it's diminishing to her possibilities. Because my mom told me exactly the contrary. She said, you can do anything you want. And even if she was not right, I believed it. And here I am. How can you teach people to be crippled from even without trying? And this is something that has a lot to do in Europe. I see it a lot. French people, Italian people, they tell to their children, you don't deserve this. This is exactly what they say. You don't deserve this. But then you think about what happened during the war, what happened to their families. Like they were probably very poor. There was a famine, like all that stuff, and say, you don't deserve to eat that. You have to leave it. You have to sacrifice. So for me, it's very interesting to see. That's why language is so important, how these words can actually be taken in a different direction and be offered in a way that they can be very uplifting and full of possibilities, like a block, like just take it, and I think this is one quality we both have and share. And that's why we're probably connecting, because that's what we're doing. We're sharing to the world that there's a possibility. My studio is called Studio of Endless Ideas. There's no
Mhm.
space for like, no, that's not going to happen. I just need more time, basically. Just need more time. But anyway, so thank you so much, Mari. I'm looking forward. I mean, we could talk for hours, but I also want people to be able to invest in the book or
Mhm.
invest in themselves through, I mean, connected to themselves through the book. So thank you so much for this. And
Such a
thank you.
pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for this.
Yeah, let's rock and roll.
Yeah. Rock and
Yeah,
roll.
thank you.
All right.
Okay, so I'm going to stop recording and then stay for a second.